Hello, it's week 2 of season 6 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Andy's Rival. Barney, Andy and Aunt Dee are in the kitchen expecting Helen to come for supper. And they know that Helen's going to be bringing somebody with her. Aunt Dee thinks it's a lady from the Raleigh School Board who's in town for a while. And then Aunt Dee tells Andy that Helen's a fine girl. And she says that he'd better talk to her about their future if he don't want to lose her. And then Andy starts making some punch supreme that they both know that Helen likes. And then when Helen comes for supper, we see that her person accompanying her is not a woman from the Raleigh School Board, but a man from the Raleigh School Board. His name is Frank Smith. And Frank brings some fancy wine with a French name as a gift. And Andy says, okay, we'll drink this instead of the punch. And Frank says that Raleigh is becoming an embryonic megalopolis. And Andy says, yeah, I guess it could. And Frank also says that some of the houses in Mayberry definitely look like they're antebellum. It turns out that Frank was a history major. And Aunt Dee starts embarrassing Andy with a little reference to history that he made long ago in his high school valedictory speech. And after supper in the kitchen, Aunt Bee tells Andy that he should speak up more because it seems that she thinks that Frank is starting to make Andy look bad in front of Helen with his good looks and all the history that he knows. And then when Frank is talking to Ulti, it's clear that he knows a lot about baseball too. He was a relief pitcher in college. So when they all go out to the front porch, Aunt Dee makes sure to bring out Andy's guitar so Andy can be the center of attention for a change. But Andy don't want to play, so Frank takes the guitar and he plays beautifully. And then later that night, after Helen and Frank have left, Aunt Dee gripes at Andy that he didn't play the guitar after Frank did. She says that Frank can turn Helen's head if Andy's not careful. And then Andy finds out from Goober that on top of this, of all the other stuff he knows, Frank also knows a lot about cars. He used to be an auto racer. Goober says that Frank is smart and good looking. He could get a date with any girl in town, and he wouldn't even have to put grease in his hair. And after school, Ulti tells his pa that he wants to be a school teacher because Mr. Smith is teaching them so much down at the school. Ulti keeps saying how smart Mr. Smith is. And Andy is starting to get pretty mad. So he goes down to the school to ask Helen out for the night, but then Frank comes in to continue his work with Helen, and he starts showing off his knowledge of trees. And Andy starts talking about clouds, but then Frank knows more about that topic too. And then Frank leaves, and Andy and Helen decide on the time of their date that night to go see a movie. And later Andy listens to Goober gripe about Lydia, who's the girl that he's sweet on. Goober thinks she's been seeing the butcher. And Andy says things will get better. But then later that night, Helen calls up and breaks her date with Andy because she says she's still working late with Frank. So Andy goes sees the movie with Goober, since Goober couldn't get a date with Lydia. And then afterwards, they both go out to the diner for a hamburger. And at the diner, they see Helen and Frank in a booth sitting on the same side of it. And Andy and Goober sit on the other side, and Goober tells Helen, we saw a movie, but I think Andy would have liked it better if you'd been with him instead, Helen. And Helen and Frank say their work is done. And when Andy walks Helen home, they have a big fight about it. Andy says he wants to know where he stands, and he yells, do you want to run with him or run with me? And Helen gets mad, but Andy kisses her, and they make up. And then Frank leaves town, and later Andy recites his valedictory address for Helen. Well, I'm glad it all worked out. We'll see you next week for episode 3.